Hi, Jordan. I wanted to leave you some feedback on your week one writing assignment. So your heading over here is looking pretty good, but it looks like you forgot to include your header. So remember, you also need to include your last name and page number in the upper right-hand corner. Remember, there's a tutorial on how to format your submission in MLA. So if you need directions on how to create a header, you can find that in the resources folder. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about your summary. So I think one thing is going. Well, I think several things are going on. You are blending your summary along with your own response into a single paragraph, right? Which is making the organization and focus of your ideas unclear. So I would recommend, particularly for this assignment, you want to keep your own personal reaction separate from the actual summary. So when you summarize, this first phrasing here, I will be doing this, that's really redundant. The reader knows that through the signal phrase, for example, like what I showed you guys in the lecture, in George Orwell's A Hanging, the author argues. It's really unnecessary for you to say this, and it's just extra wording that gets in the way. And note that you're really repeating the same idea here. So it's best to just use a quick signal phrase in George Orwell's A Hanging and then go from there. Also, the first time you introduce an author, you want to use his full name. So here you want to say George Orwell. And then you present the idea that the author is discussing whether it is appropriate for people to be hung. And remember, it's a weird phrasing because we don't usually use this in English, but you say hanged, right? Hanged, not hung. So note here that when you say the author is discussing whether it is appropriate, I think he makes a really clear, I think he has a more narrowed focus than this. He's not discussing whether or not, he's saying that it isn't. So down here, you say that the author believes that it's okay to hang someone. I'm going to disagree with you there. I think that that's a misread of this text. So I would recommend that you go back and take a second look at the essay, read the epiphany moment, and reread the final moments of the text. So you're trying to build the key moments here in the text, and I think the general ideas that you're doing here could work, but the language presented in the sentences are too broad for the reader to really be able to follow. So you say the first main idea was focused on how much a man can do to another man. That sentence is so broad that it could really be applied to any scenario. You need to narrow it and focus it into the specific context. So I would paint those background details that the reader needs in order to be fully enmeshed in the story, right? So I think that you're moving too quickly for the summary. You need to slow down your pace a little bit and bring in more specific, concrete details that help the reader understand the setting, right? Who's telling the story. You say things like, for example, some people, you're being way too broad there, right? You need to include the specific characters in the text. So you say, my claim on this essay is that it's okay for people to be hanged depending on the charges and whether they are true. So it's okay to disagree with the author's stance on the topic. However, for a critical analysis essay, what you are really examining is how effective the author's argument is based on the evidence, right? So what gives me pause here is you seem to be debating whether or not capital punishment is immoral, not the effectiveness of the author's argument. So I think you could work with this idea, but you want to tweak it a little bit. So instead you're thinking about, okay, what audiences would be persuaded by Orwell and by his argument, and what audiences would likely not be persuaded and why? And then what kinds of evidence exists in the text to support that idea? Okay? So as a whole, I think you are working on some good ideas, but everything is still a little broad and therefore unclear. And so the reader's having a hard time following I think your ideas with ease. So going back and editing for vague language is something that would really, really help clarify what you're trying to say here.